we go to the second panel, may I invite Professor, newly appointed Professor Dr. Shantana Banthasari-Shod to share the session, please.
Thank you very much. The previous session, the morning session, more talk about public sphere more or less in the national boundary. Now the second panel will take you to transboundary. I think the nature of public sphere probably be something different, and we probably have to ask different questions. We've learned that from the morning that we seem to link public sphere with democracy. But see, there's a mixed picture that perhaps not enough. Now, the second panel will raise another issue is accountability. But what can you do when it's transboundary? So we will hear from 4 speakers. That will be a little bit reorder. We start with Ian Muti, Executive Director at Equitable Cambodia, will be speaking on land, and then followed by Kun Premrudi Dawleung, Lao Dam's Investment Monitor. And then Ajahn Carl Middleton will talk about hard law, soft law, transnational accountability. And then you'll be ending up with a broader picture by Commissioner Edmund Bond, who will be referring to human rights declaration of the ASEAN. So may I invite Ian Muti to begin. 15 minutes.
Thank you very much, and good morning to everyone. It's my pleasure to be here. So today I will share one case study on the land issues in the northern part of Cambodia. But before I get into this case study on the land issue that impact on the indigenous community in the northern part, I just want to give just a little bit of the political context. I hear a lot from our speaker this morning talking about the shrinking space and the increase of militarization in the region. So not very different in Cambodia, as you all are aware. Last year there was a big attack on the opposition party, civil society, and media. So the main opposition party was dismantled, and all the seniors and members of the parliamentarians of the opposition party were also banned from exercising their political rights for 5 years. And of course, media and the CSO was also under attack. Also, our colleague this morning mentioned about the increase of new laws, basically in and the aim of to increase or silence the oppositions or descendants. In Cambodia, the same. Cambodian government introduced new law, land goes law on non-governmental organization, basically trying to restrict the activity on the ground, as well as the union law, basically also to limit the abilities of the union to do the work. So as a result, we see this law has been used to against some human rights and outspoken organizations, including our colleagues here from the Mother Natures, some international NGO like NDI working on the election, and my organization was also suspended last year and reinstated early this year because of the pressure from the international community. So back to land issue, Cambodia is a big crisis in terms of the land issue. We see a large scale plantation has been developed across the countries, and we see almost half of the relevant land has been privatized or owned by the private company. And as you all know, Cambodia is also depending on agriculture, and majority of the population depending on land and natural resources. So if this large number of land has been privatized, so it will affect to their livelihood. As I mentioned, because of that, we see the populations, especially in the rural areas, been greatly suffer by the deforestation, land grabbing, and pollution in some mining areas. And we see people has been displaced because of that. And especially in the northern part, the indigenous people who basically living with the nature, the one that suffer the most. Back to the case that I want to talk about, it's just one example. This is the another Transboundary investment by a Vietnamese company called Hegel, the Hong An Yalai, and they receive a big concession from Cambodian government to operate, develop the rubber plantation. So we, since 2014-15, we represent 14 villages and different indigenous community. They speak 7 different languages. And because of that development, we see, their lands, spiritual land, or cultural lands has been cleared and destroyed by the company. This is just an example. This is just a picture before the company come. The green color basically a forest, and the people are living around that forest. And this is what happened after the company comes. So they clear all the forest and displace the people from that area. So what we do, we started with the research, trying to identify what's the problem and who basically owned or be part of this investment. So we identified a number of banks and investors and shareholders in that supply chain. We also at the same time conduct the impact assessment on the ground, collecting evidence information from the ground, and we prepare a report, as you can see on the screen. So this basically used to inform the community and also as an advocacy tool for us to have community to begin the struggle. At the same time, we also had community to organize and mobilize, also inform them what's happening around the community who own their concession, what kind of option they can take basically to find solutions. These is just pictures of the press conference so that they can raise their awareness publicly about the impacts that happen to the community. So after the complaint to the IFCs, Hegel responded and agreed to engage with the mediation, and they also admit the mistake they made to the community. Also, community at the time during the mediation, they agreed to put the moratorium on clearance, within the concession or to expand further. Just the pictures of our mediation. And as I said, because we do community organizing and also engaging with other stakeholders, buyers and investors. So these are the banks and the company investor that basically involved in the Hegel case. So the investors sometimes changing. We had to constantly searching and updating who are the new one basically coming into the business. So outcome. So of course I already said earlier, the others key outcome after the negotiation, the government and the company agreed to exclude 2 villages that were not yet cleared out from the concession. So we measured around 10,000 hectares of land was excluded. That's as a result of the mediation and people working with the local government and also with other stakeholders. Government, in this case, it involved government, local provincial office, company, NGO, and the community. So all of us supporting community to conduct the demarcation, to identify all the impacted areas, and also to identify the boundary of the concession. So we have completed all of that work. So now we're in the process also to discuss about the returns of the impacted areas. Company agreed to return 22, and the 23 will be discussed in the coming weeks. Whether they agree to return that 23 area, or we still need to further discuss. And also we need to monitor what the government agreed to restore the streams, or the area that they were already causing impacts on the community. Next steps, as I said, we will have final negotiations to return all the remaining areas to the community. And if they refuse, then we will, of course, work with the community to take this case further. This means we can begin our advocacy, soft or hard advocacy, local or internationally. So that's still on the plans. But let's hope that company will agree to return what the community demands. Then we can settle this, and we can set this as an example of the case that we can basically work with all stakeholders, including the government, NGO, community, and CAO's IFC mediation process. At the same time, there's a number of agreements that the company will restore roads and water sources. So we will monitor that. And finally, it's a big part of it, very expensive process. We're going to have community, the indigenous community, to register their land. So this is kind of a successful case that I want to share with you all, because that's a long struggle of the community and NGO. But we not against anyone, we just try to find the solution for everyone. Thank you.
Is this a good practice or not? It sounds like turning a crisis into opportunity. I can see that the transboundary is not about people moving, it's the company moving to other places. And the case for this area shows that what does it take to make the company accountable to. We can discuss it later. The next second thing, we will be speaking on transboundary responsibility and accountability in Laos hydropower politics.
Good morning, everyone. The issue is huge for me to speak in 15 minutes, but I will try my best with my December pace of feeling. Yes. I plan to just run through very quickly. When we are talking about the transboundary issue and linked to the Lao dams, of course, it's been transboundary from the very beginning, right? As many of you know that Lao, with the ideology of being the battery of Asia, right? Lao is now building, around 45, 50 dams already, and going ahead for another 50. For sure, right, in Laos only, there will be definitely 100 dams very soon, and most of the dams are in order to sell electricity to other countries, mainly to Thailand. The map that I'm showing very quickly, hydropower dams in this region. And that, the red and orange dots is, the planned dams, right? And the number being given is not 100, of course, it's going up to 350 dams that allow like to build in the country that only have 7 million people, of course. And of course, the dam is not only thing, right, that now being built as a large-scale project in Laos. It's also, mining, also large-scale, business and things, right, as you may have heard. And then Laos, especially on the dam issue, is linking directly to other countries, especially Thailand. This showing just focusing on the joint venture and the project in Laos that involve the Thai company. Thailand is not the only country that building dams in Laos. Of course, we have China, Malaysia, the Southeast Asia, and China are the main actors in the Lao dam business. And of course, the dream of the Lao is that they have the potential of build the dam to serve for like 20,000 megawatts of the hydropower, right? And they would like to sell it to the Southeast Asia country, not only Thailand, but also Cambodia, Malaysia, and Vietnam. But around 90% of all electricity from hydropower dam aim to sell to the single buyer, Thailand. So we are very much talking about the regional issues here, and of course, for so many years already, Laos have already been built their own dam in the past 15 years, and of course, the very much concern of everyone who monitor this issue is that when the idea of being the battery, the needs of the Asian, the need of the energy in Southeast Asia is still there. Look like very tempting, right? But if you look very deep into the actual need, like for example, the need of the energy in Thailand, which is still very much in debate, right? Like we are having the overwhelming more than 40% of the surplus of the energy already. So we cannot avoid looking at the energy issues in the regional level, along with what's happening inside Laos. But of course, what we are seeing with our own eyes is the impacts of the dam in Laos, both inside Laos and with the neighboring country as well. The impact to natural resources, environment, very heavy flood in the past rainy season, right? I think it's the only in one province in northeastern Thailand is like 400,000 rai, which is like large area of the rice field has been flooded after the dam in Laos released the water, right? And it's really made macro flood. So the impact is very clear already. We don't have to talk about the biodiversity and what's happened in Laos in the past 15 years, right? I think what we already been more or less conclude is that the dam in Laos have really changed the face or the image of Laos, right? It's really limited some kind of the alternative thinking about the development in the country, because the country have been gearing toward the large-scale project a lot, right, in the past 2 decades. So the problem is that how much of the natural resources they will have left in order to make the alternative choice for themselves. I think this is what most of us are concerned, and of course the impact of the dam in Laos, even the very small dam in southern Laos, can affect a neighboring country like Cambodia, because it's blocked the way of the fish migration to the most important area like Great Lakes in Cambodia. And Cambodian people are mainly relying on the fish, right, for their own daily food as well, and also the economy. Like 12% of the Cambodian GDP came from fish. This is a pretty old number, but I think we can always refer the macro fish with the Cambodian GDP until now. And I just came back from Stung Treng, and we don't see this picture anymore. The fish market in Stung Treng I don't know what happened, but it's been flooded. I don't know how long, how permanent it's already been flooded. And very quickly, I think Carl will also come back to this. A few dams, right, that we have been spending lots of time. This is Namthern 2, the first dam that we spent 12 years to campaign. This dam were, backed up very strongly by World Bank, and this is the last dam that World Bank playing the very key role to guarantee the benefit of the project for Laos. And this is built in it's a huge area of Nagai Plateau with a very rich biodiversity. From Namthern 2, these pictures of the area are gone now. People who are very rich with the fish can fish in Namthern and its tributaries. And now we are coming to talk about the lesson learned from Namthern 2 already, right after how many years have passed, right? The impact of this dam in Laos and also the not credible economic return, for the long run. You can look for this book from the shop, I think maybe later on. And then from Namthern 2, the civil society group in the region also spent time to fight with several key dams. Right? This is Don Sahong Dam, built in the southern Laos, blocking the most important fish migration from southern Laos down to Cambodia. Don Sahong Dam, and they block this channel, Pu Sahong, with lots of fish migration, and lots of campaign on this. And now it's already been built, right? Don Sahong by the Malaysian company, and then Sayaburi Dam with the Thai company is now on the way as well. The same as Don Sahong, this is a dam that blocking the macro mainstream by the Thai company selling electricity to Thailand. And then lately, this is very famous, Sepen Senam Noi Dam, built on also in the tributary linked to the macro directly. And Sepen Senam Noi, I think it's another big turning point, right? Because the impact and also the life that this dam, the collapse was taken, has made Sepen Senam Noi a very key focus in the past at least 4 months, right? The dam just broke at the end of July. And this is the Korean, Thai, and the Lao company invest together. And the impact of Sepen Senam Noi is not only in Laos but also in Cambodia, because the huge amount of the water, right, burst, after the collapse through the forest, and then it's collapsed on the Lao villages, and also come down along the Saigon River down to Cambodia, and it's made at least 17 villages, flood very heavily, and people have to run to the higher place in the forest. So, looking at all this, I think we can see the development, at least from the point of view of the civil society, who are trying to work, finding out about the impact of the hydropower dams. I think the development is there, right? Throughout the years, civil society group, the media, academics has been looking into the issues in more and more detail, right? And we found out lots of evidence, right, in order to say that how, when you weigh, the impact with the benefit of the dam, it's very clear that it's cannot comparable, right? Dams, large-scale dam built by other countries inside the country like Laos do not make the long-term benefit to the region or even in Laos itself. And right now, we are facing with Pak Bang Dam, another mainstream dam that's supposed to build in the northern part of Laos. And this is the first dam that the so-called negotiation process is happening between the local people and the Chinese company, right? I think we can talk more about this, but I don't think the negotiation is really in benefit with for the local people yet for Pak Bang Dam. Chinese, trying to understand what's happening with the people on the ground, but not necessarily respond or react. The Chinese say that they would like to use that standard to make the dam the best, but I don't think it's telling us that the large-scale dam that being built in Laos going to be in the better way. Not yet. No, nothing proof on that yet. And so I think, to me, in conclusion, make it short, I think in Laos, the Lao government still keep going with the ideology of trying to make use of that river to build the dam. But at the same time, the transboundary impact is getting heavier, and it's very clear now. The impact, like the flood, used to be only the China dam up north, in the Lansang, Mekong, in the China area. But now the impact of the Lao dam for the Mekong flood is very clear as well. And I think the Lao government cannot bear the responsibility, right? What's happening with Sepen Senamnoi is a very clear proof that the impact is too much for them to be responsible. And that may be partly because they are not completely own the dam, right? The dam was owned by the outsider foreign company. So they are not, as a government, they have to respond to the impact, but at the same time, they don't have enough capacity to pay the responsibility. I think this is one of the issues, and at the utmost, concern issue is that there is no, regulation or we don't have enough to make the company, the private company or the commercial bank that invests in the dam take responsibility. It's not enough to really make them come out and say clearly, because the government, like the Lao government, still playing the role of defending for hydropower, because this is what they want. Right? They're still working for the company in the sense, right, protecting them from coming out to bear the responsibility. So my last point in relate to the key issues today is that what do we do, right? And how can we react? I think the issues of dam, this is the protest of the Pak Moon Dam, people in Thailand in front of the World Bank on the Lao Namthern 2 Dam, back to the time that we still doing the campaign on that. The Thai people keep on going, right, with the protest. This is for Sayaburi Dam in front of the court, administrative court in Thailand. We used to have done this, we invite the ministry from Laos, Cambodia to Thailand. We invite them to speak about their ideology and what they want to respond to the issues like hydropower dam. And lots of things mentioned in the ASEAN level. Right? This is ASEAN People Forum. Participate with as many as 3,000 people. This is in Myanmar. Hydropower dam always the issues, and I think for the Sepen Senamnoi, especially if we compare between what happened with Namthern 2, right, back to how many years ago? 12 years ago, and now with the movement with Sepen Senamnoi in the past 4 months, right, we keep seeing, this is the pictures from the media. The media keep reporting on Sepen Senamnoi, and I think this is pretty amazing, right? One of the very interesting thing is that this is the first time ever that the Lao public also voiced about the Lao dam themselves, right? There are, 100,000, 700,000 likes of the post of the Lao person talking about the dams in Laos. And this is something that we have never heard, never seen before. But this is happening, right? And our work in Korea, we went in front of the Korean company, and later on the Korean parliamentarian, the National Assembly members took these issues as inspection issues in Korea. So it's the media keep reporting again and again on what's happening with the campaign of Sepen Senamnoi here with the Cambodian person who also went with us to Korea. And I think this is a very interesting thing that she's the reporter of the Thai PBS, the Thai television channel. She went with us to Korea, and even she would not come to as a panel and speak in front of everyone, but she spoke from the floor. And she was one of the very key attention of the participants, talking about her experience being in the impact area for 3 weeks. So I think it's really important that we go deeper on the work between the civil society and other groups, media and other groups, and trying to learn together. And I think that's all my point here. And last thing that I would like to refer to what Ajahn Nirumon just mentioned about, actually we are doing with not only the transboundary cross-border issue, but the cross-border in terms of, we are not taking only one issue. Right? Like yesterday we just had a panel discussion about Sombat Sompon. And what I have heard as a reaction from the Lao group in relation to Sombat and about Seven Senam Noi, exactly the same. The defensive mechanism that express, about who have done that, who should be responsible on this, exactly, and how many people die again, exactly the same. Only different two issues, but the paradigm is not changed. Okay, we come back again if we have time about this. Sorry, I spent 3 minutes more than what I supposed to. Thank you.
Everybody has brought up us to the level of the sphere that is out of the national boundary. It's driven by the market, by a kind of extractive nature of development. But the question still remains, when the company doesn't belong to the country, what accountability of whom? Whose accountability should we think of? So Ajahn Kao will answer this.
I will try. Actually, I will try genuinely. So this presentation, I hope, will build on what Pete Ian has just presented about the challenges in particular of hydropower. What I'm particularly interested in is the role of hard and soft law and transboundary accountability, and specifically related to our forum today, what role does the public sphere play in relation to this law and this accountability? I think just to start, the things that we should be talking about in public spaces and the public sphere are issues of public concern. And as has already been mentioned clearly on the panel, land issues, hydropower, energy and water are all public concern issues. So these are legitimate topics that should be being discussed. In the context of Southeast Asia, we see the map again. In the context of Southeast Asia, the processes of regional economic integration that have really accelerated since the late 1980s have thrown up all forms of new challenges of state accountability and private sector accountability. And probably the question that this raises for this presentation is, in the context of increasing facilitation of cross-border investment, how is transboundary accountability mechanisms, how are they keeping up? And I think that's been the theme of the first two presentations. In this presentation, our last aspect was in the role of hard law and soft law, and how does that relate to the transnational public sphere? Why focus on hydropower? Actually, I kind of research on hydropower, but also on land, and I have a similar presentation in the context of land. But as Pete Ian mentioned, there are many transnational actors involved in these types of projects. They're state actors, but they're also private sector actors and also civil society. Impacts do not remain just localized, they also flow across borders. So fish migration, this is already mentioned as an example, but many more than that. A river like the Mekong River is ecologically connected in many different ways. And then finally also, trade is flowing across borders from these types of projects. So electricity trade, finance flows into the projects and so on. So they're transborder in many ways. So specifically relating it to law, I think this book, is an excellent insight into the legal regime around water governance in Southeast Asia. And what it points out is that there's no single, they take the perspective of legal pluralism, which means that there are many different norms and rules. Some of them are very hard law, like national law. Other of them are more like commitments, like maybe what the hydropower industry might commit to, a so-called hydropower sustainability assessment protocol. In the context of the Mekong River, there is an agreement between the lower four countries, Cambodia, Laos, Vietnam, and Thailand, for the Mekong Agreement. But that in turn relates to a larger international agreement called the UN Water Courses Convention that Vietnam has ratified, but the other countries have not. And the key message that's taken away from this book is that hard law can be deceptively soft, and vice versa, soft law can be remarkably hard. What that means is when the authors, Ben Boer, Philip Hirsch, and Natalia Skura, when they were looking at law, they found that some of the more effective ways of shaping the outcomes of projects were through some of the softer mechanisms, for example under the Mekong Agreement, rather than using national law. I want to unpack this a bit more in the context in this presentation. But the key thing here is that there's a legal pluralism. When we talk about law, it's not just national law, there's many other ones. Professor Chantana was saying, what are we going to say about the transnational public sphere? Because it's different to the way that the public sphere has been thought about in the past. Right? In the normal, like the idea of the public sphere is often related to that you've got a national authority, the government, and then you've got a national civil society that is going to talk in the public sphere, and somehow the government's going to respond. So you have a clear authority, the government, and you have a clear bounded civil society who are often understood to be citizens of the country, and therefore they have a legitimacy to engage their government to make some change. But in the transnational public sphere, an academic, Nancy Fraser, has kind of asked questions of, well, what does it mean to talk about transnational issues? I mean, with civil society, how can we relate claims for legitimacy, for example? Like, we can claim to be regional citizens or global citizens and therefore have a state in places outside of our country. But also, when we talked about regional development or globalization, who nowadays has authority? It's not just the national governments. Or in a transboundary project, it may be governments in several countries at the same time. So when we talk about transnational public spheres, the question is like, who are the civil societies and what legitimacy do they claim? They often spread transboundary. The actual location where the public sphere is many places at the same time, including nowadays in the cybersphere, like the Facebook and so on. And then who's going to respond to the issues that are being raised by civil society? Is it only the national government? And would it be the national government from the home country or the host country? What should we expect of companies? Nowadays, many of these companies have larger incomes than some of the countries that they're investing in. So there's a whole set of new challenges around transnational public sphere. So Ian introduced comprehensively the challenge of hydropower in Laos. And so what I'll just try and do in particular is to draw out how I can see this relating to the issue of transnational public sphere in some way. So as was introduced, Namten 2 has been this almost iconic project. It was constructed at a time when hydropower had an incredibly bad name. And actually the World Bank had not funded a hydropower project for 10 years since Patwardhan in North and East Thailand in the 1990s. So when it was mentioned that the World Bank was keen on this project, a lot was at stake because they basically want to say, look, we've learned our lessons and we can do it damn better. And for this presentation, what I want to point out is that a lot of this played out very publicly. It was in the public sphere, the debate that was taking place. So another academic called Jerome Whittington talks about sustainability enclaves or kind of bubbles. And I think that's a good way to describe Namten 2. That, okay, there's a whole debate around Namten 2 and the project and what it should be doing, whilst around it other things were not changing that much. So it kind of created a sustainability enclave, although that's not really to claim that the project is sustainable. A debate that's kind of just been re-enlivened this year is the publication of this book, Dead in the Water, that highlights that many of the environmental and social commitments of the project that related to the World Bank safeguard standards have not been met in the way that they were promised originally. And I could give more details, but I'll focus on the transnational public sphere. So related to the transnational public sphere, as Ian mentioned, that there was a strong civil society engagement or critique of the project that played out in the media. And so the top book, Doing It Down Better, is a World Bank publication. And it's in some ways incredibly honest. Even though in the end the book is trying to say, look, we did it down better, it says the lessons that it learned about the project. And one thing that really surprised me was how honest it was about the role that the World Bank and Namton II had to take in shaping communication. So shaping the public discourse, coming from the project proponents. So this is a quote from the book. From the beginning, Namton II was a lightning rod for criticism. The debate on dams in Namton II had a long and contentious history. The World Bank had to be on guard against reputational risk from misinformation. Over time, it used communications as a strategic lever to influence the debate on Namton II. This is what the World Bank wrote about how it had to shape the public discourse. So these are some examples on the left-hand side of articles that were published. So the first one is kind of a milestone article in Newsweek that was kind of a very favourable article towards the project. One quote from this is in November 2007, midway through construction. There's a lot riding on Namton II. Laos needs to boost its economy and its human rights credentials. The World Bank wants to prove that kinder, gentler mega projects are possible. About a month later, the World Bank itself, in its own blog, kind of re-quoted that as a part of the communication strategy. Needless to say, this is a very polemic media debate. So on the other side, The Economist, for example, published an article titled "Damn the Consequences, Big Bag Dams Return to Southeast Asia." AP at the same time wrote another article, Critics, Lao Dam was bad for villagers. I think the other thing that's significant in terms of this sort of discourse and how it circulates in the public sphere, one thing is it was very transnational. The accountability for the project was very much lying in the sphere of the World Bank. The Lao Dam was obviously involved heavily, but the World Bank was a target. So it was very much an international public sphere shaping the project in Laos. The second thing is that there's a broader discourse that's now emerged in Southeast Asia on a notion called sustainable hydropower. And I contributed a chapter to the book that I just mentioned, looking at the origin of sustainable hydropower. And you can kind of trace it back to the work that was done at Namton II in the mid-2000s. And that in itself has now become a regional discourse, that it's possible to do sustainable hydropower. And again, this is very contested, but what's the significance of that? Like the public discourse that circulates in public spheres at the transnational level creates the idea that sustainable hydropower could exist, and therefore legitimizes future projects, even when they don't match that reality on the ground. The second project, just to sort of give a more recent update, so in many ways, Namton II is it's an anachronism in Laos. It kind of stands separate from everything else because many subsequent projects were by developers that have very far reduced standards in terms of environmental and social performance, and also in terms of accountability. And Zayaburi Dam has been the one that's gained the most public attention recently. So it's been introduced already. It's largely a Thai construction consortium that will export to Thailand. Even at the very beginning, it was carried out in the public domain because it was the first project that was seeking to really go forward on the Mekong River's mainstream, like to seriously gain momentum. So on the one hand, you had the Lao government saying that they could manage everything. On the other hand, you had the project developers saying the same, there will be no transboundary impacts. And then you also had downstream countries raising concerns through various processes as the project started to gain momentum. So, only to be very brief, but to point out this sort of idea of legal pluralism and transboundary public spheres, there were many different, what I might call arenas of justice or arenas where decision-making played out. Some of them were quite formal, like national law, or under the Mekong River Commission's PNPCA process. Other spaces were within parliamentary processes in Thailand or within the Senate. And then also within transnational accountability mechanisms like the OECD guidelines for multinational corporations. So there were formal and informal spaces where public discussion was taking place. Hard and soft laws were shaping the governance, but so were the discourses that that were circulating within the media and the social media that were influencing the processes and outcomes. So to take one example that I think gained a lot of attention in particular, the MRC's procedures for notification of prior consultation and agreement, which is under the Mekong Agreement signed between the lower four country governments. So it had to be initiated by Laos, as it had an intention to move forward with the project. The process entailed what we might call information sharing meetings in Cambodia, Vietnam and Thailand, but not in Laos, and it also received online submissions. The process itself was criticized by groups that tried to engage in it, that saying, for example, that it did not gather all the comments and it was difficult to see how the comments that were collected were substantively responded to. In the end, in my reading, in my opinion, the process has never really been concluded. So on paper, I think it was after 12 months maybe, it was supposed to draw to a close. But there was never any formal decision reached as to whether the project should go ahead or not. Instead, there is this statement released by the Joint Committee of the four countries. Lao PDR insisted there was no need to extend the process for decision making. And then a bit later, Cambodia, Thailand and Vietnam, however, raised their concerns on gaps in technical knowledge and studies about the project. So there was not consensus, but there was a whole other set of political processes that basically enabled the project to go ahead. That Thailand's energy ministry could sign the power purchase agreement, EGAT, the utility could sign the power purchase agreement that opened up the financing that enabled the project to actually start construction properly. So again, within the public sphere as well, there were positions pointing out the shortcomings of this process, for example, international rivers, whilst also the Lao government engaged to talk mainly through VNGM Times, arguing that actually they had met the requirements and the project could legitimately go ahead. It was playing out in the public sphere. Also, just relating this very briefly to the sort of decentralization of political authority and how it relates to transnational public spheres. This was the first, a landmark case in Thailand that civil society groups and public interest lawyers and community groups along the Mekong River in Thailand could bring a case to the administrative court questioning the project and questioning whether the project had met the requirements of Thai law. And again, a lot of this played out in a very public way, in the media and so on. Also, the Thai National Human Rights Commission investigated the case, and I've written a little bit on both, and I'm not going to go into detail here, but what I want to point out is that these are simultaneously legal processes, but they're also public processes that are debated within the public sphere. Some of these processes could probably only go ahead because they were elevated to be a very visible public issue. So the communicative action, the idea of the public sphere is that those in authority respond in some way. Well, it's really hard to judge. I mean, the project went ahead, which to many would say that it was not a desirable outcome, whilst the project developer pointed out that they had spent over $100 million to redesign the project, including building a new fish path structure, which we'll have to see if it works or not. Probably not, in my opinion. But the thing is, this is an example of how the transnational public sphere shaped a transnational process to result in a communicative action, meaning the redesign of the project. So the public sphere matters in Southeast Asia, even though the context is very different from place to place. And more broadly, we can see this in the extraterritorial obligations that are emerging as a norm across the region. A paper that I wrote recently argued that this could not happen without the strong role of civil societies building a momentum around ETOs, working together with national human rights institutions across borders. So in conclusion, discourses are circulating within public spheres that are both challenging and legitimizing hydropower, including this sort of emerging discourse of sustainable hydropower. And these words matter, the discourses in public spheres matters because it leads to material outcomes on the ground. The transnational public spheres that were produced by civil society did shape the outcomes of Namsen and Cuba's ivory dam. It took place in national and regional processes, including in non-formal arenas. But I think going to the point that Ajahn Chantanan pointed out at the very beginning, transnational public spheres are created and affirmed and reinforced only through the actions of civil society, communities, and committed individuals. They're not given, they have to be claimed. And I think that's a really important final message.
Thank you. It's a long answer to but I think Ajahn Carl has cited a number of cases that would be drawn into consideration as to how the public sphere links to different actors at different levels. Even decentralization of the local community. Let's hear what Commissioner Edmund Morgan have to say at the regional level.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you to the organizers for inviting me here and allowing me to stay in Chulalongkorn. I feel like a student again. I just took the bus and it was really good because I could sit on an electric bus and see the whole university. Thank you again for the excellent administrative and logistics supporting my visit here. I have 15 minutes only, so I'll make 15 points, but I'll probably not end with all the points, and I'll probably lose track of the numbers. Contextually, very good presentations as to the cases that have come up and the monitoring and evaluation. But I'll just put it in a broader context of the right to development, because this is a developing right. In the 1986 Declaration on Right to Development, it was signed, but there has not been much progress because the challenge is states are not accepting what it means to give the right to development to individuals or communities. So there is a definitional problem. To what extent do states have the obligations to protect their right of development? Because when we talk about right development, we think about terms in terms of trying to create, for example, a rural area to become a more developed area. So states will say, is that the right to development? Is that my right that I can demand international donors or foreign countries to give me some money to develop that space? Or is it the right to development for the community that is displaced from that rural area to say, no, I do not want this unless it's with me, and for my benefit? So that kind of contestation is a contestation that we are seeing around the world. The right to development, I think, talks about nothing about us without us. So it encompasses all the key principles that have already been sort of binding in soft law. It talks about self-determination, participation, consultation, non-discriminatory access, equal and adequate access to resources, transparency, accountability, and importantly, I think international cooperation where the donors and people that are funding some of these projects have the burden to promote fair development policies and effective international cooperation. So right to development encompasses all these rights: civil political rights, economic, social, cultural rights. I think that's my 2 points that I made already. So the third point that I want to make is that in ASEAN, in the Southeast Asian region, there is no real effective mechanism to monitor this right to development. I just speaking with Kun Apichai just now, and I think he's looking at his report. He just finished a report in September 2018, and I think afterwards we can ask him to share about his report. I think it's a very important report where ASEAN is seen as an architect for regional development. How much ASEAN is actually receiving, how much ASEAN is actually putting back in to actually help the people. Are we doing enough? Is the ASEAN centrality principle something that's hindering or something that should actually be looked at more in these terms? But we have not framed, to me, I think there's not enough discussion, and we have not framed a lot of these issues within this human right. So this is a new human right. And this human right, surprisingly, was adopted by our leaders in the ASEAN Human Rights Declaration. In Article 35 of the Declaration, there are 3 elements, quite lengthy, that actually adopts in core the human right, the UN human rights right to development. But I suspect our leaders didn't understand those terms, because if you look at Article 35, it's very interesting. It actually reaffirms the principle that the right to development is primarily to protect the individual, to protect the community. It is not what I would think some states, and the states we were talking about yesterday in Somba and today Laos, I would suspect Laos would be thinking, no, right to development means I have a right to get money so that I can build those dams, because that's development. So I suspect Article 35, when it was drafted, and Article 35.1, if you look at it, takes wholesale the UN Declaration of Right to Development. Article 5, 2 and 3 is slightly different, but I suspect our leaders, but it's good for us, like human rights activists, it's good that they didn't know what they signed up to. But if you look at it, it's a very, very strong right, because it takes away, it encompasses all the CPR rights, all the ESCR rights, into one right to development. How it has played out, I think that's my 6th point. See, I'm quite fast, right? How that has played out in Malaysia, for example. So Malaysia, I give 2 examples. In Malaysia, the orang asli, the ancestor, our indigenous, displaced from their land for development, not paid proper compensation, they only paid for the fruits and trees. Court said, no, this is unfair, this is wrong. Court decision to give the indigenous orang asli in Selangor for their displacement higher value for their land, compensation, because that land is seen as ancestral land. But when that case was argued, and we were part of the Bar Council team that was supporting that case, we never once used the word right to development. That was in the 1990s. There's a landmark case, but we never once used the word right to development. We only saw it purely as an ancestral land claim. We had to get the indigenous to come and give evidence about how far back they were living there, dig the graves up, dig the land up to find remnants of what their great-grandfathers had. But it was never contextualized or litigated in terms of right to development. Another case is a case in Africa, where it was contextualized and litigated in terms of right to development. It's the Androros community in Kenya. What happened there was that they have been living there for many 60,000 of them in this tribe community, living there for many years. They were displaced because the Kenyan government wanted to change it into a game reserve. Gazetted as game reserve, moved them out from the land, and then they sued the government with the help of NGOs to say that this displacement is forced, there was no proper consultation, there was no proper compensation, and those other arguments. The African Charter is very interesting because it's very close to the ASEAN Human Rights Declaration, 1986, the Banjul Charter. Also has a right to development, but not as developed as ours. It says that states have the obligation and duty to make sure that the right to development involves the people. And the African court there said, yes, the Kenyan government was wrong to have done this. Please go back, start talking to the community. Number 2, give them continuing grant to access the game reserve, means it's their ancestral land. Number 3, give them compensation. And number 4, after 3 months, come back to the court and tell me how you have implemented this. But that case, if you look at the judgment online, was contextualized as a case litigated on the right to development. Had we no such right to development, the indigenous in Kenya, in that case, would only have been able to litigate it in the way I've mentioned it in the Malaysian case, which is, oh, this is my right to cultural life, this is my right to the land, access to the land, to fish, to be able to hunt. And so that was a very limited right. But the argument in the Kenyan case was that it's much wider than that. That you have now taken away my land, and therefore it does not allow me to develop myself according to how I self-determine it. And that's where you see the challenge. Because if we, so of course, some of us are, or most of us are from the city, right? We say, oh yeah, very stupidly we say, we should try and develop indigenous land. Give them an opportunity. And we think that's good for them. But they say, No, that's not good for me. They're not consulted. So that's where the contestation is on the right to development. I think I made 10 points. I'm on track, right? So to answer the direct question as to whether there's a transboundary mechanism in ASEAN, I don't see it, unfortunately. However, I understand there's one on case. I think it was mentioned earlier before in the session. There is the Bohol anti-trafficking in persons work plan that was developed by the SOMTC, the senior officials meeting on transnational crime. That sets out some cross-sectoral support, and we also have foreign donors that supports us. But that really is to implement the ASEAN Convention on Trafficking Against Persons. There has been humanitarian assistance. It's not a mechanism that, how to say, it's not an M&E mechanism. It's a mechanism that is where foreign donors actually provide a lot of funds to the AHA Center, the ASEAN Humanitarian Center, that does humanitarian work in many affected countries around the ASEAN region. But it's not M&E type of mechanism. It's a mechanism that just delivers aid. And that's actually been very effective, because if you look at AHA Center's mapping, they have had supported a lot of countries which have suffered from natural disasters, and recently Rakhine State, there is now a discussion as to whether the AHA Humanitarian Center is already going into man-made disasters. Because what's happening in Rakhine State is a man-made disaster, and the AHA Humanitarian Center, the AHA Center has gone in and provided that aid as an ASEAN body, but of course bilaterally, some countries like Malaysia, Thailand, Indonesia have also provided that aid. Moving on, I think number 12 or number 13 point is the SDGs. So the right to development, although it's not mentioned in the SDGs, must be used, SDGs must be used in the advocacy for the right to development. I identify 4 SDGs at the moment where we can contextualize the right to development. SDG 10, reduce inequalities, reduce inequalities. That's a big problem, because SCAP's report recently has said that we are backsliding on that. SDG 13, climate change. Climate change is another issue that comes up within the context of right to development. SDG 16, peace, justice, and strong institutions. That's another one that we are regressing in the region. And SDG 17, partnership for goals. So whenever we have foreign donors or we have support from dialogue partners, we should make sure that they understand, and we inform them that this project must have this kind of impact, but also if you are going in, pouring a lot of money into dams, we need to make sure that the communities are not affected, and that issues like Sombat can be raised. So yesterday, after the workshop conference yesterday, I went back to our chat group, and then people asked, well, how can we now lobby the Lao government to look into the Sombat case a bit more effectively? So the realization of the 3 summary points is that development should further the realization of human rights. That's a very important thing that we must remember. Development must not be seen purely as, I don't know what you want to call it, as a social construct or engineering for what one segment of society thinks is progress. So right to and the funny thing is, the right to development is a human right. So if I read the whole sentence together, development should further the realization of the right to development. And therefore, then you see the what is it, concentric circle, or I don't know what it's called, it's a paradox. Development should further the realization of human rights. And because the right to development is a human right, development should further the realization of the right to development. Number 2, human rights standards should guide development cooperation and performance and participation. Human rights standards should guide development cooperation. Number 3, development cooperation should contribute to the development of the capacities of duty bearers. meaning states, to meet their obligations under the right to development. Development cooperation should contribute to developing the capacities of duty bearers of the right to development, should contribute to developing the capacities of states, and also to contribute to the obligations, the rights claimants. Meaning, development cooperation should not just provide capacities to states, it should at the same time provide capacities to individuals or individual communities that are affected by those developments. So it's a twofold obligation. Practically, we have poverty gaps, climate change, food shortages, armed conflicts, rising unemployment, as practical issues that we see today, which are matters that should be discussed within this group. I just want to end by saying that it's a very new right. It's something that not many have talked about, especially in ASEAN region, or not talked in a way that it's a human right. It's still not well understood. In the ICHA, I'm very happy how you put I was looking there, the picture of ICHA. That's the climate change workshop that was done by Myanmar. Myanmar has followed up with that. So no one can say that ICHA has not done anything. So I'm really happy that you put that website up. Really good. But on right to development, Malaysia is champion on the issue. We have not done any programming except to actually talk and do consultations on it. Programming, there's a workshop that we want to do next year, 2019. The concept note has 99% been approved. In Malaysia, we plan to do a workshop where we want to actually find a way to discuss these issues in sort of a no-name basis, in sort of a way that is comfortable for all 10 countries. So the workshop is called Developing a Baseline on Article 35 of the ASEAN Human Rights Declaration. But the style is not going to be the usual ASEAN style. So the team has discussed that, and we said, let's do it as a workshop style where we bring up these cases and then talk about how we contextualize the right to development and the other rights and who are affected parties, so that the agencies or the state governments or state officials that come actually can start to realize it. It's still very young, right? I'm not saying that it's perfect, but I'm saying that maybe the advocacy can be now pitched at the level that's the human right to development for the affected community rather than just for the government that wants to continue with the particular project. Thank you very much.
I didn't count whether it's 15 points. Okay. Now we learned that maybe the right to development is misinterpreted, and then Edmund has already elaborated that it's not to impose upon people. So now the floor is open for questions and comments. I think the panel has explained in one way or the other the nature of Transboundary. I think it's driven by what the multinational corporation in relation to resource-based development, extractive one. And it's also driven by the flow of resources, that's becoming like international resources like water. And I think it's raised a really contested type of development, like the dam, whether Laos will be a battery of Asia or not. And the other side of Transboundary, we also heard of people trying to connect to different levels, and there are also experiences. It takes, what does it take? Accountability. I think here the panel mentioned even the knowledge, the hard fact, the mediation, the sharing of information, and even the organization of people, and also even the quality of democracy and the local government that could connect to a larger public sphere. But in terms of the mechanism of accountability, I think it's a little bit, it's not really configured what would be, and it depends on how the issue is driven, to different directions. There are already experiences, and I think Ajahn Carl mentioned a number of things. Also at the local Cambodia also have already experimenting with some alternative to mitigate and change the crisis into opportunity. So whether we have a mechanism of accountability at the regional public sphere, the floor is yours. I will follow the order, please, the gentleman there, and
Toshi from Mekong Watch. Question for Luthi. Did you, in your analysis, what were some of the, perhaps a few key factors that made the Hegel case a success? And in relation to that, perhaps in the context of this discussion on transboundary mechanism, did you also try to work with NGOs and CSOs on the Vietnam side? Did you even think about it? If you so, did you actually do it? If not, why not? That's my question.
we collect questions first.
Yeah, thank you very much. I think most of the focus of this session was on the Mekong, and it's a very important subject area. Of course, Edmund just referred to my report, which, okay. There is something that I brought up in the report, specifically on the Mekong, is that actually 5 years ago at an ASEAN summit in Brunei, as usual, the summit usually issues quite a long list of things to do or what they have decided on. This is from the leaders of ASEAN. But one interesting thing that strikes me in this particular case was that they did mention something in relation to water resources management. They tag along a phrase at the end of that, which says that ASEAN should be assessing impacts that economic development has on the environment and people's livelihoods in major river basins, including the lower Mekong Basin. Okay? Now, as a statement of intent, all right, I mean, leaders, they don't go into details. I think this was a sort of a game changer in the sense that they actually opened the opportunity for some kind of assessments. Of course, this has not been clearly defined. One can, easily just, take it that this would include environmental, social impact kind of assessments. And economic development, of course, is not defined, but certainly dam construction, road construction would probably fall into that. And the effect on environment and people's livelihoods. Okay, that's quite clear. And they specifically refer to major river basins, not just Mekong, but including the lower Mekong. So the focus is towards the lower Mekong. So I have been championing, telling the NGOs, hey, this is your golden opportunity. The leaders have spoken. If they were silent, then you could hardly break the wall, right? So, but I haven't seen anybody taking up this issue. In other words, leaders, you can go and then take accountability here, right? You can report and say, hey, what do you mean? Can we get an interpretation of what kind of assessment? Who's going to do it? Reporting to who? And what are you going to do after that, correct? I mean, these are the follow-on questions that should be then asked. So maybe there's an opportunity now that Edmund mentioned that next year you're going to do a consultation or whatever on the right development. Maybe you can pick up on this thing and see how do we interpret that. And the other opportunity that I see is that Thailand is chairing ASEAN in 3 weeks' time. And one of the centers, they are going to set up 7 centers during the chairmanship year. One is actually on the ASEAN Center for Sustainable Development Studies and Dialogue. Okay? Now, what do they mean by studies and dialogue? Well, studies means like doing assessments, doing research analysis, right? Dialogue means to convene certain forums and think platforms to discuss what sustainable development is about. So maybe this should be another agenda item for this new center. Okay? So to me, there's opportunity, but we need to strike where the iron is hot. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Rui. I'm a journalist from the Straits Times. I was very intrigued by this concept of the right to development. And thank you for the presentation. But given the state's conventional concept of development and also in the context of land grabs in this region, I'd like to hear what you think is the potential use of this concept of right to development in the course of law in the region. Or do you think it's actually more useful in reshaping the language of advocacy?
I have two questions, one to Edmund, another maybe on the issue of the Mekong in Laos and Cambodia. For the right to development, it seems to me that the state claims that it has the sovereignty right. But how about civil society or the public sphere? Can they say that I also have the right to development and what kind, the type of development that we want, and who take accountability? Going to be Aisha or the sovereign state? And if the sovereign state disagree with the people in the public sphere, can Aisha do anything?
You have a lot of hope, Aisha.
Well, I don't know. This is what I asked for Aisha to step in. Because it's linked to the second question. For instance, the case of forced disappearance. I know that right now that Aisha also take the lead, but I mean when it related to the issue of the right to development is still, disappear. I mean those who has been forced disappearance because of land grab or because of anti-dam or whatever. So in that case, I feel that maybe because I see the different case in the Salaween River Basin, even though there are still conflict, but I see more role or initiative role of civil society, even though it's quite the hardline one. But I don't see civil society in the Mekong, either in Laos or in China. I may see some in Cambodia that you fight a lot, but in that case, my question is that why? If we argue that the Mekong have the River Commission, so it's have more institutional to work on that case, but what happened to the public sphere that why you don't use this opportunity when it's become more institution, or because it's become an institution, that why it's disappeared? Thank you.
Okay, something on Hegel, on the Vietnam, you have to answer, and question on opportunities at regional level, and also particularly asking your 15 points work as well.
Can I start? Just to answer to Toshi's about what are the two factors that made the case success. Actually, I didn't call this case as a success yet. I would say a half success because there's still a lot of things that need to be done. But in terms of things that we have done so far to elaborate this case to in this level, I think it's very important that we have to work with the local community. In this case, we spent years of time working with the community to build the capacities, and also, as I mentioned in my presentation, we also have to document everything, so the impact on the ground, and also trying to identify who are the actors involved, and also identify what are the options available for the people to use and also for us to engage. So in this case, luckily, we are able to engage with a whole range of stakeholders, including the government. It's very rare. Most of the time, government involved with the right of uses. But this case, because of the World Bank, IFC play a role. So this part of the condition and requirement that government have to be part of the process, and the company also receive loan from the IFC also have to be part of the process. So we able to bring everyone to the table and discuss to find a solution. But there are still issues that we need to address, and we'll see what happens in the next months. And then if it's not worked out, then we have to find another way to deal with this case. So that's just my short response to your question. Of course, yes. We work with the Vietnamese NGO, but the context is very different. Mostly we get information from them. They cannot be exposed because of the context here. We work with a few environmental NGOs there, and we always exchange information as well. So,
Thank you for all the comments. So it's not R2P, it's R2D. And I think the advocacy for that is important. I think Abhijay mentioned a very good point because he's the one that will read all the long joint communiques. I think none of us in this room, even myself, read the ASEAN leader statement. So for me, I just read the HR statement. The rest is like negotiated, but I think Abhijay has done a very good job. So I think Abhijay, you have a free invite to my workshop. If I'm reappointed, if not, we have to ask the new rep to invite you. But I agree with you. So the easiest way in is to have to get these sectorial bodies to work with CSOs. And so far, we've been working with the ASEAN Working Group on Water Resources Management on our water and sanitation project. So Malaysia is champion on water and sanitation. That comes under the ASEAN Ministers of Environment. And they actually, I learned that they're actually very open. They actually really want to help improve the water governance issues and resources, and they've done quite a lot of good work in ASEAN. So perhaps this is a way in, an entry point for CSOs to work with them in maybe a form of a thematic study. A thematic study is not so hard-hitting, but it still will be able to gather the national researchers' points of view, so that the thematic study will include definitely research and synthesis at the regional level. To the question, sorry, I didn't get your name. You are from Sri Lanka, Singapore, is it? Sorry, I didn't get your name. Kui. So you're publishing, is it? Sri Lanka will let you publish.
Publish what about this conference?
This story.
No, just a story.
Oh, okay. No, because yesterday at the conference, there was some reporters there. We didn't know there were journalists there. Yeah. And I know sometimes Sri Lanka, Singapore, because we have some stories that come out that have not actually come out. So every time I'm asking the journalists whether your story will actually be censored or changed, because of the sensitivities in Singapore. But I have no problems with answering your question. Yes, litigation-wise, because the right to development is not stated, I think, in any of the ASEAN constitutions. So if we are looking at environmental impact, if we're looking at environmental impact assessment type of stuff, if there's law under the Environmental Quality Act, if for example it's indigenous, then we're looking at a particular act that applies to indigenous. So it's very thematic centric, and it's not that broad argument on right to development. So in ASEAN, the litigation on the right to development is very, it has not developed. Where we have got the entry points with the judges have always been about purely the thematics. If it's the thematic on the indigenous, then the law that applies to the indigenous, the common law. If it's on the environment, as I said, if you are doing a dam, make sure your EIA is done. But when you go to court, you say, okay, the EIA is done or not done. What are the criteria? Has the law been followed? Has it been effective? So what is important is still that the national state, national governments must insert into the law these obligations, although you don't mention it as right to development. So you're right, I think advocacy-wise, R2D is actually more effective. And at the moment, we can see, just now the session also, we don't talk about it in terms of the right. We talk about it in terms of what the issue is, which is very important, but how do we contextualize in the right also, I'm not too sure. So it's still a very, very young right, and reshaping the shape of, and you're exactly right about shaping it in terms of that advocacy. I thank you very much for mentioning that ICHA has done a bit more than CSOs. Actually, it's not true. ICHA does a lot of programming and promotion work, but so happens it falls into that kind of rubric. So ICHA Myanmar does climate change and EIA. They have done 3, I think, and the Swedish was supporting that. No one has actually done on other issues. So right to food, poverty, we have not done that. However, what said, and I think I want to emphasize a bit now, is this. If somebody drafts into ASEAN Human Rights Declaration something that is good, or that they don't understand it, right? Then as CSOs we should take advantage of it. I can't be clearer than that. If, for example, a country has health, has education, has good living standards, then the hypocrisy argument is to be used. You are so good, why don't you sign up to the International Covenant on Economic, Social, Cultural Rights? Similarly, the ASEAN Human Rights Declaration, Article 35, 1, 2, and 3, is actually very, very good. It's just that nobody has used it. Nobody has really used it in a way that I just mentioned it. But I think it still needs time for CSOs to start adopting that kind of language. Because the fear is, when you say right to development, then people say, oh, yeah. Does it mean I have the right to displace people from the lands just to build them? So I think in that mind, some states think, I give a very concrete example. When we presented this workshop on Article 35 baseline HR, there were no objections at all. In fact, one of the countries mentioned, they said, yes, we must do this, because every country in ASEAN has the right to development. So I said, okay, let's do. But I think there's still a misunderstanding as to what it means. Because some state parties think that right to development is, oh, I'm just bringing the cash so that I can build my camp. But for us, we think a bit differently. But there's the match as to thinking that we need to have a common understanding, and therefore we're doing the programming for that. So I just illustrated what you have just mentioned.
Very, very briefly. Response to Abhishek. I mean, there are many declarations, as the Declaration on Environmental Sustainability, the Declaration on Gender Responsive Implementation of ASEAN Community Vision 2025 Sustainable Development Goals, the ASEAN Human Rights Declaration, which includes the right to a clean, healthy and safe environment. But actually, this is not to criticize it, it's actually to say that there's a lot out there, even including this and beyond. And maybe the whole point of the presentation that I was making is that I believe that words matter. So, in other words, each of these declarations constitute the sort of norms of expectation that the governments profess that they will be held accountable to, even if they're not ultimately at the moment. But I think there's also sort of profounder ways that this structure shapes things, which is through education institutes, for example, through the way that research is selected and undertaken, even like the report that you do that kind of reproduces, and maybe the purpose of a meeting like this is to share all of these things that are happening and further the discussion in the belief that it really does matter. So although it's a little bit abstract response, I think to try and pinpoint why these things matter is because in the end, what we talk about will shape what's considered legitimate and what's considered wrong. And so if the ASEAN Declaration was taken the other way, where it says we don't care about livelihoods, we don't care about the environment, and business should just do whatever it wants, I mean, that would be problematic, right? But the fact that the declaration is going in completely the other direction creates the legitimacy to say, well, we should be moving in that direction.
I'm not sure if I'll answer the question, but I have learned a lot from sitting here, listen to our panelist friend, and also from your question as well. I think maybe my final point before we split for lunch is that I think we looking at what we are doing, not only CSO but other ASEAN function, Asia as well. I think we are just like a picture that never complete. You know, what we are talking about in my home country, this is the 25 years, right, that CSO emerged in this region. Before that, you don't have the so-called CSO or the NGO in Laos, Cambodia, Vietnam. ASEAN Charter happened when? 10 years ago, Asia, younger than that. Yeah. So we are talking about these, 2 decades of the development of, the sector, the function that's supposed to work together now. But I really agree with you, Edmund, when you are talking about the misinterpretation, right? I mean, our leaders do not know what they are signing on. And I think when we are talking about the debate on the land issue or the hydropower dam issues. I don't think we are looking for the, only the space for the ground in order to reflect about their needs or, the impact that already been occurred. But I think what we have never reached is that the actual debate or whatever information sharing that make us reach the point that what should we do, right? For example, how can you talking about, the problem of the dam when in one side the investor, which is very strong, and ASEAN, who is taking the economic integration as the main idea. Even ASEAN have Asia, right? But the economic integration is there. Investor is talking about the price of the resource when the local people talk about the values. So there is never be the space for the local community to debate on the price, or the investor and the authority, including the regional authority, talk about the value. We never have that. So I think the CSO and the local people always feel that they're catching up with running after something that they will never be able to grab, and nobody wants to spend time to work within the ASEAN platform, right? Because how lots of things that people facing on the ground already, why they have to spend time to talk to the mechanism that they know that really have the economic integration as the ideology. So I think we have to me, I think what we have to do is that, firstly, how you interpret, because the utmost goal of everyone is what we call the sustainability, right? In the value, in the price, it's the same. How can you live sustainability? How can you have peace in this region? So it's not only the shallow or the channel, how can we debate now about this specific dam or the land issue? No. Otherwise, we won't spend these 25 years of having very religion result that we are all facing. So I'm inviting the deeper debate with the real knowledge, which is everywhere, especially on the ground, right? We have enough knowledge to debate whatever you want, But maybe, we have to try to provide that space, rather than come from our, platform that we have with our own function that we have handled. Thank you.
I really want to close because but there's one question. I think you should entertain one person.
Thanks. I'm Tanya with Mekong Watch. And actually, sorry, I meant to try to get in beforehand, but a couple of quick points. One for Edmund is that, and a sort of question is that if people are to use, for example, the SDGs as leverage and as a discourse, it would seem within this discussion that we're having really difficult and challenging and potentially problematic, given that the SDGs, particularly SDG number 9, focuses on interconnectivity projects and building economic corridors, particularly road projects and other types of large-scale infrastructure. And secondly, that there's a private sector partnership promotion within the SDGs, which then would leave it, as we've been already discussing, how it creates such massive impunity and a lack of and huge gaps of accountability. So if one were to use a couple of the SDGs, it would seem very piecemeal and very difficult to argue. So that would just be a question. And secondly, in terms of the discussion around the right to development and the discussion around litigation possibilities, as well as talking about, for example, the legalities being followed around, or the rules of EIAs being followed. But a question would be, then in cases like, for example, Laos, where the country still, the the government says that they are aiming to become a rule of law country by the year 2020. They have there's nothing in place there for people to hold accountable. And secondly, then they, for example, Sapien Sam Noi, the project was approved prior to EIAs even being done. So in that case then, and then again you have the transboundary question. So I mean, then how does the right to development relate to the transboundary implications of one country perhaps, or communities, and then communities on the other side of the border. And then I guess just finally in terms of, Carl, your discussion around the sort of transnational public discourses, I think it's really interesting, and I wonder also, and again this is maybe just for thought, but how that has then played out in the situation, let's say around the Sapien Saenam Noi, with the collapse of the dam and then the public discourses transnationally and in the media focusing pretty much eventually on the relief effort, and it then becoming a relief effort that has now been transmitted and communicated as a post-disaster relief. And then aid agencies are able to follow what they're calling the Build Back Better policy of pushing forward private sector infrastructure and using that opportunity of development to build up private sector.
I'm not sure whether you want to respond or you want to go for lunch. Quick.
I will get one. I mean, I didn't manage to have breakfast either, so I'm very keen for lunch. But just what you just said kind of points towards the importance of the public discourse in the first place. So the possibility that Build Back Better is the right approach misses the more fundamental question of accountability, which I know other civil society groups have been pushing for. But I think that, even an early example of how the project developer tried to frame the disaster as a natural disaster because of too much water was very quickly corrected by media and by civil society groups as a human-made disaster because of poor design. I think that shows the real significance of creating the right discourse for the public to understand what's happening on the ground. So this Build Back Better, it's a nice idea, but it's not the key issue that should be being discussed in this case.
Daniel, just quickly, two things. SDGs are not human rights. Human rights are not SDGs. 90% of SDG goals are human rights based, but not necessarily all. The point about SDGs is, I think, and this was, I think, one of the discussions when they were trying to frame it as a political negotiation, is that the SDGs cannot be done in a way that extinguishes human rights. So what I'm saying is that you look at SDGs for the ASEAN countries, whenever you talk about human rights, you have some countries being a bit more reticent. But when you talk about SDGs, immediately all the countries will say, yeah, no problem, let's do it, because it's SDG based. So that's why I've chosen SDG, and that's why one of the most important SDGs that we keep working on is SDG 16. Because 16 looks at strong institutions, and that's related to your question on how, when you say the word rule of law, again, within the ASEAN context, I just hosted the ASEAN Chief Justices a few days ago in Kuala Lumpur on the rights of accused persons in criminal cases. There was consensus that every ASEAN member state should abide by the rule of law, should be democratic, should provide access to justice, should have everything that democracy, rule of law in the ASEAN Charter. That's a headline issue. It's easy to accept the headline issue because no country will say, I don't want to be part of rule of law. But when you go down into the details, when you go down to a level below, then the question becomes, what do you actually mean by the rule of law in your country? Because some governments say, this is the rule of law for my country. So when you say that's the rule of law, is there a rule of law in Laos? Because I have my own personal opinion. But the question is, when we talk about rule of law in that context, you will find agreement, you will find consensus. Now how are we going to talk about the details? And so it's linked to the particular issue that I've just mentioned. If you're looking at a particular case, you're looking at a particular SDG, or you're looking at a particular problem. I think the panelists just highlighted that. That is the type of advocacy that we should be trying to look at on R2D. Thank you.
Thank you. Short summary. The regional public sphere is under configuration, but we're not sure how it takes shape. And I want to follow Ian that there's no real host to pursue how to configure the regional public forum. But I think the norm is there, but how you can use the political language, in this region. It's called for a number of things: capacity, knowledge, multi-stakeholder, multi-level perspective. Is also pluralism of accountability. So I would like to suggest that Atankal project is to map out regional public sphere, how it's reached the frontier of the public sphere for window of opportunities and also collective experiences. Thank you very much for excellent panel and also for the